In this video I'm going to show you how to carve the lure body for these steelhead baits. And so in your template kit there you should have 3 pieces. The first is the side profile, and so that's to get this dimension on the crankbait. The second is the top profile. Let's see, so we kind of got that rounded shape on there, and so here's the top profile of the bait. And the third one might be a little bit confusing, but what we want to do is we want to make sure we have a nice flat place to stick prism tape or chrome tape or whatever. We're going to want to give some of these steelhead baits some flash, and so you're going to want to take and make sure that you leave a nice flat spot all the way around the lure, so that later on when you get these things made, you can just take a piece of tape and wrap it right around from top to bottom, get a nice chrome finish on there. So those are the 3 template pieces. To start making your lure, all we're going to do is we're going to take the first one, which is the side profile, and we're going to lay that down on the edge of, I have balsa foam here, so we could either use balsa foam or balsa wood or pine or whatever you want to use, but something that's really easy to work with and easy to carve would be perfect. Okay, so I've got that traced on there. So I'm just going to go out on the jigsaw now and cut that out. You could cut this out with a coping saw. You cut this out with a scroll saw, whatever. One thing that I'm not going to do, especially with this balsa foam, since it's so easy to sand and shape afterwards, is I'm not going to try to cut too close. I'm just going to get a general outline. You can see here, I've cut some other lures out of this stuff before, and you can see that I've gone much actually larger than the lure itself, because this stuff is so easy to shape and sand. Got my side profile cut out. And I'm going to sand the rest of it here. I have a scroll saw, and I use it at a real slow speed. Turn it almost as slow as it would go, and really cut it nicely. So if you have a scroll saw, I'd recommend that. Looks really wide right now, but you know, we're basically going to just keep removing material here until we get down to that body. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a piece of sandpaper. This is just a little sanding block that I got. I think it's probably about 100 grit, and I'm just going to kind of finish making this shape here. One thing about this, if you're using balsa foam, it's really messy when you start to sand. It shapes real nice. So get a box or a bag, plastic bag or something to work in. So I'll stop the camera here, but basically I'm going to take that sand paper and just get this shape, this general shape, sanded out of there. Okay, so I've got it all sanded now to that shape that I've given it, and so now the next step then is to kind of put the top view on the lure, but we're going to of course do that from the bottom where it's nice and flat. So I'm just going to lay this on my lure, trace around it, and then basically just take my sanding block and sand back around that shape to kind of give it the side profile there, or the top profile. Okay, so I've got it traced down there. Notice there is a front and a back to this top profile, so make sure you get the front lined up with the nose of the lure, of course, front and the back, because it does get a little wider up here and kind of tapers as it moves to the back. Not much, but a little bit. So make sure you get that correct. All right, now I'm just going to sand that out, give the bait that dimension. Okay, now it's starting to take shape here and look like a lure, and this took no time at all with this balsa foam. So one thing that I'm really conscious of in whatever material you're working with is when we're putting all of these shapes on there, we want to really make sure that we're keeping the bait symmetric. So I've really been working hard to make sure that as I've been sanding this stuff away, that I'm keeping the sides symmetric and everything symmetric, because once we start to round the plug, there's going to be no way to tell it's going to be harder to tell what's symmetric and not. So basically what I try to do is when I've got these nice straight edges, try to make sure that I'm sanding and taking away material so that my lure is pretty symmetric. Okay, so now we just got to make sure we leave this portion flat for this tape. So I'm just going to basically lay this template on there, wrap it around there. I might tape it on there. Probably tape it on there, but anyways, make sure that I get that thing around there and get it square, and trace some lines on there so that I have a nice place to stick the tape after the lure's finished. So I got it marked. I didn't tape it. All I did was hold it by hand and mark it around there. I mark it on the top and the bottom because I want to make sure that that tape is going to stick all the way around the lure. I put that on there as one piece For those ones we want to chrome, we just take one piece of tape that goes all the way around the back up to the front like that. Okay, but one thing that I forgot to tell you is before we start rounding anything now, so before I want to round, I'm going to basically we're going to take and round all of these edges off now. We don't want to do that yet because while we still have the bait all nice and square, I want to set the lip. And so basically what we got to do is we got to cut a notch in the front of this lip so that we can slide the lip into the body, and this is just one of the regular lips that we're using. So we're going to slide this lip into the body, and I just measured that out, and it's 9/16 of an inch that we want to slide this lip in there. So I've marked the lip. I put a mark here at 9/16 of an inch, and now I just got to cut this line. And the hacksaw blade, I've got a hacksaw here, and the hacksaw blade is a perfect width for these 32 thousandths of a lip, an inch of a lip. So I've got the hacksaw blade just laying flat down on the table, and what I'm going to do then is I'm going to take the lure and just slide it across on the front, across the hacksaw blade, to cut that slot for the lip. So it doesn't really matter exactly where I put this. I got to kind of center it a little bit so I don't, cut off the side of the bait or whatever. But up and down, it's not going to make that much of a difference. The one thing that I have to make sure, the real important thing to do here, is I have to get this lip square. I don't want this lip sitting in my lure crooked, like this. I got to make sure this thing is square. And so that's why I've laid the hacksaw down on the table. And basically what I did is I just took these couple pieces of paper as shims here. So I got my hacksaw nice and sturdy and laying flat on the table. And now I've shimmed this with paper until my bait lines right up with the hacksaw blade where I want it to. And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide it across that paper as the shim. And then that's going to make sure that I'm getting a nice square cut across the front of the lip. Okay, so I got to make a little correction here. I said when we insert the lip in there that we set it back in 9/16 of an inch. And now that I'm done with my mold, that's probably a little bit too much. I think a ½ inch would have been better. So instead of 9/16, let's make that lip sit back in a ½ inch. The other thing we want to do is we want to put a little bend in the lip before we glue it in. And so I came at a ½ inch here, put a little mark on my lip, and then I took a hand seamer. This is a cheap little tool that I got at Harbor Freight. It was like $8 or something, basically, and then bent that square. You could put this in a vise. You could also, worst case scenario, use pliers. Got to be a little tricky with pliers because sometimes they're not square, but a vise or a hand seamer would have been good. And I just put a little angle on that lip, and you want to put a little angle on that lip before you glue it in. The reason being that when we make this mold, we don't want the lip coming in at this angle. If the lip comes in at this angle, there's not a lot of material on the bottom here to hold that lip steady. But if I put a little bend in it, now when I make my mold and I insert a new lip, that new lip is kind of going to be coming up at an angle, with that bend in there. The lip's at this angle, and that lip now is going to insert into the lure kind of at an angle like this, right down the center. Then we got a lot of material on the top of the bottom to hold that lip. So we want to put just a little angle on that lip before we glue it in, and that will make sure that we're getting a nice solid lure when we pull these things out of the mold. So I've got my blade now. I cut that with the hacksaw, and I got it squared up so that my lip is even. And I set it back in. I cut the slot just a little bit deeper than 9/16, so the lip would slide in a little bit further, but that doesn't matter. All this lip is going to have to do, I'm going to super glue this lip in there when it's time. Not yet. We don't want to. We're just setting the lip in there for a second, but I'll just super glue it in there, and all it has to do is remain stable during the molding process, and then we're all set. So I kind of sanded back to the line, kind of cut any sort of angle that I could take, and now I'm just going to kind of keep, bending that angle until I kind of get to the middle of the lure. So I kind of took an angle like this until I got back to the line. And now I'm just going to kind of fade that angle down until I get to about the middle of the lure. So cutting a real steep angle there. Now I'll just bend that up to meet that other one. Kind of try to get them halfway. See where I am there. Okay. So you can see what I've done is I've just kind of angled the bottom up and the top down, kind of meeting at this high point here on the edge. Now, to keep things symmetric, it'd be tempting to just kind of go ahead and finish rounding this side all out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, so I kind of get to this same point. Just again helping to keep symmetry in my lure. So I'm going to go ahead and work on the other side now, doing exactly the same kind of taper I gave this one. Bottom kind of meeting up to this point in the middle. So now I'm at the point where I've got it pretty symmetric. Now I'm just going to go ahead and shape this a little bit. I'm going to taper the front maybe just a little bit more, round this edge a little bit more, and maybe taper the back just a little bit more. Kind of round these corners up here at the top a little bit. Basically now I'm just going to kind of go freehand and go real slow and take it away a little bit at a time and just kind of look at the bait and sand it a little bit and kind of keep working until I get what I want or get what I'm looking for. Okay, so I just finally hit it with some 220, and I just used a hand, just my hand, my fingers, real lightly. Again, you can really take a lot of that away even with 220. So now I've got my symmetry on the bait kind of all figured back out. And so I'm not going to worry about any holes or divots or anything like that. Basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to glue the lip in, and then we're going to take spackling and cover the whole thing with spackling, and then sand it back down again and make sure we get a real nice smooth finish on the bait. So just going to take some super glue now and glue the lip in. Going to be real careful, make sure when I get that lip glued in there that I don't get it tilted, you know, to the left or right. Just square it up, glue it in there, and let that dry a minute, then we'll just spackle the whole thing. Okay, so the spackling's dry. Now I'm just going to go ahead and sand that down with 220 again. The lip here, I just, you know, put spackling everywhere, but we want to make sure that this is a straight line. We're gonna actually be bending this lip up and down, so you don't want to have a curved surface going from the bait to the lip. You want to make sure you get a nice flat line there. So I'll make sure when I sand this, I might even use an X-Acto knife and just cut that square and then sand it down to match. Make sure we get a square there, and now the spackling's filled in all those any holes where we put the lip or anything like that, so it's going to be all smoothed up. So okay, so it looks to me like one coat of spackling was plenty. I got a real nice smooth finish on there. All I did was take a piece of 220 and hand sand it. A couple things to be aware of as you're sanding. As I mentioned before, we want to make sure we get a nice square front on the top and the bottom, because we're going to be bending this lip, and you want to have a nice kind of angle on the when we actually get the actual bait, we're going to want to bend that lip down, and so having a nice line for that bend is really handy. The other thing is on the back side of the lure, I don't want to round this a whole lot, because you know, this is what's going to be screwed into the piece of plastic in a second here. When we make a mold, we're going to run a screw through the back of this, and that needs to sit real nice and flat on that mold. And if you got it all rounded, you're going to get a bunch of silicone and stuff in there. So really don't really work out hard at getting the back all pretty and rounded. We want to keep it nice and flat. When we actually make the baits that we're going to fish with, we'll go ahead and when we pull them out of the mold, we'll sand the back end. The front, however, we want to make really nice and clean, because that's the most important part of the lure. That's at least the most important part for being streamlined and such. And so anyway, spend some time making sure you get this flat and also nice and smooth up front. Okay, now I'm ready to just seal this. I want to put a nice seal coat on here so I get a nice gloss finish. So you could use polyurethane for this. Probably even use a water-based polyurethane for this if you wanted to. You could use a high gloss spray paint if you wanted to, but we want to get a nice shiny finish. All I'm going to use is the same thing that I use to put the final finish coat on my lures. It's called Seal Coat. And so I use this stuff to put the final coat on my lures, you know, after I'm done painting them. So what all it is kind of a water-based polyurethane, I guess. It's a little bit thicker than normal polyurethane, so you get kind of a higher build when you're putting that finish on there. But something glossy, basically. If you get something glossy that finishes in a short amount of time, dries up in a short amount of time, which is what I'm going to use, that's handy, because then you don't have to wait for it so much.